Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Mead.
And I'm Christy.
And in this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, well, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out,
but actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Do you ever do a dry January, Christy?
Oh my gosh, yes, I did. I did a dry January a few times in order to prove to myself that I didn't have a quote-unquote problem with alcohol. And one of two things happened. Either I didn't make it all the way through, or I did, and I went back to drinking just as much on February 1st.
Yes. One of the things during my dry January attempt that was worse than almost drinking was the noise, the mental real estate that alcohol occupied during that time, even though I wasn't drinking, which was so bizarre to me. But I'm so excited because we get to do dry January with an amazing group of gals, totally different.
Yes. Yes. So we are going to be coaching through my book together, Love Life Sober, a 40-day alcohol fast in our beautiful community. We would love you to join us. We are going to kick off on January 6th. We're going to be meeting for 6 weeks. All the calls will be recorded, and we are going to pop all the information for you in the show notes. Head down there, click on the link. We can't wait for you to join us. Hello, my beautiful friend. Happy Monday. Welcome back to BJDW. We have one of our favorite guests, one of our most listened to episodes of all time, and both of probably one of our favorite books on this topic, Alcohol Explained. William Porter is back in the house. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to see you both.
Yeah. We're so excited you're here.
So excited you're here. So excited. Our last conversation was, I remember you saying the thing about letting go of the life raft and asking you if you had that. I was like, that wasn't in the book. And I think you made it up on the spot. And I was like, gosh, you're so good at this. That was so awesome. Recently, you wrote something, though, that I wanted to dive into today because I love the way that you've mapped this out. It's the 8 hurdles to stop drinking. I love the way that you've broken this down.
I think the thing for me was it was just people look at stopping drinking as just a thing, but there are different parts of it, and the different hurdles jump in at different times as well. That's the thing. You have different challenges throughout. You have the early on challenges, and then you get through that. But there are more challenges further down the line. They're different. You need different tools to deal with them. And I thought it was just helpful just to spell it out for people what I consider to be those main 8 hurdles are.
Yeah.
I think it helps because a lot of people, they're quite geared up to begin with, and they get through the first few days, weeks, months or whatever. And then other things crop up and they're maybe not expecting them. So I thought it's useful if you've got a challenge, you need to know what you're up against. So it's really breaking it down and spelling it out for people so they know what to expect roughly when they can expect it, and hopefully to give some tools about how they can overcome them.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. So let's dive into number 1, which is physical withdrawal. And I think it's so important to talk about this because I think this also looks a lot different for gray area drinkers like Mead and I were. And at the same time, I think potentially if you don't think that your physical withdrawals are quote unquote bad enough, it can also be a reason that people almost give up on this journey or justify drinking. I heard that this week of, I wasn't shaking, so I must be fine. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so when I talk about alcohol, or when we talk about alcohol withdrawal, most people think about the extreme version, like DTs and seizures and all the rest of it. But it's not all or nothing with alcohol. Of course, there's a sliding scale. And actually, I spoke about this in the last podcast, so I won't go into too much detail. But when you drink alcohol, which is a sedative, your brain tries to counter the sedating effects by becoming overly sensitive. So when the alcohol wears off, there's that feeling of anxiety and insomnia, perhaps. That is absolutely alcohol withdrawal, but on a very minor scale. So if you're used to drinking regularly, you're constantly trying to get rid of that anxious feeling. And this is what a lot of people, when they're regular drinkers, experience. Their feeling is, I drink because I feel anxiety and alcohol helps me relax. But actually, it's the alcohol that's causing that anxiety. And that feeds into problems as well, because if you've got a problem and you've been sleeping well and your brain chemistry is in a good place, you might well be fairly relaxed about that problem and feel confident enough to deal with it. But if you've got that ramped up anxiety, it can look worse and worse. So it
Mhm.
feeds into people saying, I drink because I have this problem, that problem, whatever it might be. But actually, the alcohol is making it appear worse than it is. So it can, and go back to the life raft example, it can feel really scary when you're letting go of it, because it's like, I've got all this anxiety and all these problems. How am I going to manage them? So
Mhm.
the awareness here is that you will be in for maybe a rocky few days, but as
Mhm.
your brain chemistry levels out, you'll get back to what is normal.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I wanna ask, like, the million-dollar question that I feel like everybody always asks is how long?
Okay, so 3 to 5 days is the easy answer. Your brain chemistry generally levels out in about 3 to 5 days. So that
Mhm.
anxious feeling, and of course, we're talking about amounts here, and there's a huge differing scale. You can have people that have maybe 1 or 2 glasses of wine compared to people drinking 2, 3 bottles of spirits. Now,
Mhm.
going
Mhm.
back to the brain chemistry thing, the easiest way to think of it is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, so
Mhm.
whatever sedating, depressing effect you get from an alcoholic drink, there's a corresponding feeling of anxiety when it wears off. So if
Mhm.
you're only drinking a glass or two of wine an evening or a couple of beers, that anxiety, it will be there, but it might be almost imperceptible. But if you're
Mhm.
drinking at heavier levels, it's going to be increasingly bad. And
Mhm.
obviously, when it gets to dangerous levels, that's when really you ought to be seeking medical intervention.
Mhm.
But that 3 to 5 day is usually pretty accurate for people.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people I think it's so helpful to talk about like you're doing, like bringing awareness to these things because I think that's where a lot of people get stopped on the journey before they even start because they maybe have heard about how much life is better without alcohol, but without this awareness for how your body is working so hard to find that new homeostasis without alcohol in the beginning. There's a lot happening. And then also that hypersensitivity to what you are feeling, what you are sensing. And so it can feel a little wait, what am I signing up for? And if we're not careful, feeding the story that I actually do need alcohol
Yeah.
to keep that at bay. And yeah, I love how you call this out because I've always thought of like physical withdrawals in the sense of those 10% of like really extreme, heavy, physically dependent drinkers, which was not us, and bringing light to like actually the physical components of this as well, which is what I love about Alcohol Explained too, and how it does that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I think it's really important, because if people aren't aware of that, all they know is I've stopped drinking, I feel really horrible. I'm just going to feel like that forever. So where's the benefit in stopping? So they
Yeah.
need to be aware that it's a few days. You just have to grit your teeth and get on with it. As I say, if it's more extreme, obviously medical intervention, but it does absolutely end. And I think the other point here just to mention is sleep. And again,
Mhm.
alcohol impacts sleep massively. So you never quite sleep properly when you're drinking, hence why you're always tired and lethargic. Separate topic. But another
Mhm.
aspect with sleep is when you're not drinking and when you get towards the end of the day, your brain naturally starts to close things down and release its own naturally occurring sedative. So you fall asleep. When you're drinking regularly, your brain stops doing that because it just becomes reliant on the sedating effects of the alcohol. So if
Mhm.
you're regularly drinking and that's helping you get to sleep, day one, when you stop, you're going to find it incredibly difficult to sleep. But
Mhm.
again, your brain picks up the slack very quickly. And within 3 to 5 days, you're back to sleeping normally. But again, that can be really scary, because if people quit drinking and just can't sleep, they're like, I can't. I need these couple of drinks to sleep. I can't go through the rest of my life never sleeping. So
Mhm.
again, it's just that awareness. You will struggle with sleeping, but it will even out in just a few days. You just have to stick with it.
Yeah, and what about for the people that it doesn't rectify itself within 3 to 5 days? I feel like with me, my sleep was all over the place for a while, and I think that's probably because it more overall need to set with, right, melatonin production and circadian rhythm and all that stuff and all of that. but for the gals who are like 7, 8, 10, how a couple weeks into this, and they're like, "I'm still not sleeping, William. What's going on?" What would you say to them?
Okay, so there's a huge amount on sleep hygiene, which you can just find on Google about what you need to be doing, cutting back on caffeine, cutting back on the white light, no screens in the room, whatever it takes. Worst case, you might have some kind of sleep issue, in which case speak to a medical professional about it and try and get an actual solution, because
Mhm,
alcohol appears to help because it's a sedative, but like I say, it actually destroys your brain's ability to take you through natural sleep cycles.
mhm.
So it's a really bad solution. You might find you stop drinking, you do have a sleeping issue, in which case try to get to the bottom of it and work it out. Don't paper over the cracks with alcohol, because it's the worst
Yeah.
thing you can do.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, if you're a woman within our age group, check your
Mhm.
hormones because you might be in perimenopause. Okay, number 2, cravings.
So cravings is a huge one, and people obviously always talk about cravings and how difficult they are. And if you look on the internet at anything to do with any addiction, they always mention cravings as one of the hurdles you've got to go through, or one of the withdrawal symptoms, or whatever. Cravings are a purely mental, conscious thought process.
Mhm,
Okay, they're not driven. They can be driven by a physical thing, but they're a conscious thought process. And it is a thought process whereby when the thought of alcohol enters your mind, and it will do because alcohol is everywhere, it's very prevalent in our society. So you will be coming across drinkers, alcohol, all sorts. But when the thought enters your mind, you start to obsess about it, fantasize about it, and tease yourself with it. You're thinking, oh, it'd be so nice to have a drink. Wouldn't it be wonderful? And wouldn't everything be perfect if I could have a drink? And maybe I can have one on just this one occasion, and maybe I can model. What you're doing there is you're embarking in a really unpleasant thought spiral. And apart from anything else it does, it distracts you from what you ought to be doing. So it'd be
mhm.
you out with friends, relaxing at home, on holiday or vacation, be it Christmas Day, Thanksgiving, whatever. Instead of relaxing and enjoying what's in front of you, you're suddenly taken up in this unpleasant thought process. Um, and that's why we can reach the stage of thinking certain occasions aren't enjoyable without alcohol, like Christmas, Thanksgiving, events with friends, even relaxing at home, because without the alcohol, we can't actually engage in it and think of it. And it's to recognize that thought process and to understand that craving something and thinking about it are two different things. So
Mhm.
because of what I do, I think about alcohol and drinking probably 85% of my waking hours, but
Yep,
I never crave
Same.
alcohol because I don't sit there and start thinking, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to have a drink? And wouldn't everything be perfect if I could just have this drink? And I've got used to now not engaging in that cycle and be out with friends at home relaxing. I actually concentrate on what's going on in front of me rather than embarking, as I say, on that unpleasant kind of almost internal tantrum about having,
mhm.
I want something, but I'm not going to let myself have it.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so well explained. I love that so much.
I
For
think the
the
point, sorry.
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
thinking about the point with obviously physical withdrawal happens as soon as you stop drinking. The cravings, because it's a conscious thought process, it can happen throughout the entire period. So you
Mhm,
could be 10 years off drinking, but if you start to then, oh, I'd love a drink, and oh, maybe I could have one on just this one occasion, you're embarking in that thought process. So just to make the
mhm.
point that they can happen at any time through the process.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. And I think to the point of like when you end up rewiring your neural pathways and eliminate the thoughts that there's any sort of benefit or successful job that alcohol does for you, those dissipate and then disappear, right? Like they have for all of
Absolutely.
us, because the three of us know that alcohol doesn't do us any favors, and therefore we're not craving it because we know that there's no benefit there.
Yeah.
I feel like this could be a total episode unto its own, and I know we all talk about craving tactics and ways to get through them all the time, but what's one of your favorite kind of ways to help people that are stuck in that thought loop?
I think you've just covered it off perfectly, and that's really to reframe your perspective of alcohol and stop seeing it as something beneficial and fun and enjoyable, and see it really for what it is. It is a fairly unpleasant drug, It's a carcinogen.
Wildly.
You know, but it's you can't mess with the fact it is a class 1 carcinogen. It's got zero health benefits. It ruins your sleep. It elevates heart rate and blood pressure, which has the immediate effect of feeling you very tired and washed out. Because when your heart rate goes up, your brain tries desperately to get it down again, and it does that by making you stop all motion, which is one of the reasons drinking makes you feel heavy and lethargic and you want to sit down, and it ruins your sleep. And then don't forget overriding all of that. If you're saying, yes, but it helps me relax, okay, it does, but then it wears off in 15 minutes, leaving a corresponding feeling of anxiety. Nothing out of it. And I think when you see it that way, you've just described it perfectly. You don't crave it, because when the thought of an alcoholic drink enters your head, your thought is, oh, thank God I'm not embarking in that horrible nightmare anymore. I'm free, rather than, "Ooh, maybe I should have a drink." I think getting that clear in your mind is, you can just eliminate cravings almost entirely.
Yeah, that's so good. Me, do you have anything on that, or should I move on to?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say it just always brings me back to just taking our thoughts captive, changing our thinking to change our drinking. So much of it starts and ends with that. And when I love also, William, how you said that, like, you think about alcohol, like you have thoughts because that's your work, that's your job, that's what we do. Like, so much of those thoughts, but it's the difference in those thoughts that sets off that craving train, if you will. And that, I think, is so helpful for listeners who are in that place of being able to pause and identify the thought and what goes along with it, so it doesn't end up in that spiral like you talk about. So helpful. So good.
Good. So number 3 on the 8 hurdles to stop drinking is events without alcohol.
So this is a tough one for people, because if you've been drinking for 20 years and every time you've been out to a social event, you've had a drink with you, doing that very first one can be quite intimidating. And what I would say there is, planning is key. So planning it out in advance is absolutely key. If at all possible, try and make sure you've got an exit so you can leave when you like, because there's nothing worse than feeling that you've gone somewhere and you're stuck there for 4 or 5 hours. If you can, make your first event so maybe not a sit-down meal, because with a meal you can't just up and leave in the middle of the main course and go. But if you're going for drinks in a bar or pub or even at someone's house, you're free to leave when you like. So I'd say try and keep your exit strategy clear. As soon as you tell people you're not drinking, they all want to lift. They want you to be the designated driver. So be clear up front. You're happy to take them, but actually when you're going to go, you're going to go. So I'm happy to tell them I'm leaving now, and if they want to stay, they need to get a taxi home or sort out an alternative form of transport, because that just takes the pressure off. You can almost go and just say, I'll see how I feel. The other thing about planning is, these events without alcohol, in my experience, they're not universally difficult. The hardest bit is when you first turn up. So for anyone turning up at a social event, you've got the normal dynamic is you turn up, you feel slightly awkward, you've got that social anxiety. But as the event goes on and you start chatting to people, you start to relax into it. So it starts off slightly nervous and then you relax and start to enjoy it. And also, there's a double whammy here, because when you turn up, that's when you get asked what you're drinking, and you say an alcohol-free beer or orange juice or whatever it might be. And that's when you're bombarded with questions. Why aren't you drinking? Oh, go on, just have one, etc. So plan out what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. If you can tell the people in advance are not drinking, so you don't get that whole bombardment at the beginning, but just plan, go through your mind how it will feel to ask for an alcoholic drink, what they'll say if people question your decision. And then what you'll find is it generally gets a bit easier after that. You set the die then, and you just go along with it. But as I say, that exit plan is key. If you're going to a bar or something, what a very good thing to do is to go on the internet beforehand and look it up and see what alcohol-free options they have. Because it can be a bit awkward trying to say, oh, what alcohol-free drinks have you got? And then you've got that whole thing going on. But if you know what they stock and what they serve, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, that's so good. And that temporary time that's at the beginning of the social event, I'll never forget, a client said to me, it was a Christmas party season, I think it was last Christmas, and she was like, it's really like 15 or 20 minutes. It's 15 or 20 minutes where they offer you the champagne and you have to ask for the alternative and you maybe get one question, But she's like, that's it. Once those 20 minutes were over, like it was fine and nobody cared that I wasn't drinking and it was all good. And to your second point, which I think is so important to just reiterate, is then if you become a non-drinker, they stop asking you. And so then that's really easy because you're not fielding those questions anymore. So just to emphasize that it's short and it's temporary, and yet we ruminate over it and make it a really scary big thing that it actually isn't.
No. And of course, needless to say, that one's difficult for the first few times you do it. Like anything difficult or challenging, you do it once, it becomes a bit easier the second time, easier the next time. So it starts off difficult and gets easier and easier the more you do it.
And the events become more and more enjoyable too. That's the thing. When you're at an event because you want the connection of other people or to enjoy the food or the music or whatever it is, and you can actually enjoy the thing that you're there for, as opposed to having a numbing agent on top of it, like then it gets more and more enjoyable.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about sporting events or concerts or something, because you always have this fantasy that's not true of sitting there with a drink and relaxing and watching the event and it's all great. The reality is turning up, the bar's packed, you're queuing for ages, you get to your seat and then you need the toilet and the toilets are packed and then you're back to the bar and then it's just not enjoyable. We end up missing half of it because of either getting a drink or trying to go to the toilet. So when you're not doing that, you can just actually relax and enjoy the event itself.
Yeah, it's so true. We have a leadership team of 10 gals that help us in our community that we have. And a bunch of us separately in our own home states went to the Taylor Swift concert with our daughters. And we were talking about this of did anyone feel like a real, like this natural, just incredible high of like excitement at seeing your daughter's face and singing and dancing and all these things. It was like we were all said it was way better than being at a concert drinking of how much we enjoyed it. And yeah, so good. Mead, I feel like I cut you off earlier. Sorry, babe.
No, I was just gonna say, I think I read this in what you wrote, William, about measuring success with our events without alcohol as well. Like some people like to count days as like marker for I'm moving along on this journey, but we call them AFFTs or alcohol free first times, and using that as like a measure of success. To your point, the more you do overcoming those first ones, the more you do them, the easier they get and the more confident you become. And that being like a key to the progress that you're making, if you will.
Yeah, that's absolutely sure. Obviously, dry January, and I've seen people do dry January where it's January and people say, "Oh, do you want to go out for a drink?" And they say, "No, I'm doing dry January." And their experience of dry January is, I just don't go, I just don't do anything. I just sit and wait for February to come around so I can go and live again. And obviously, counting days is great. It's all progress. Every victory is a victory. But actually, people who have done Christmas, Thanksgiving, vacations, social events without alcohol, they're really making progress, because what we're really trying to do when we quit drinking is to try to live and enjoy and cope with life without alcohol. And the more experience you have of that, the better you get at it.
So true. I'm still baffled by the fact that 5 years ago, I found freedom from alcohol. It was beginning of December 2019. And I went through the holidays. Who finds freedom from alcohol and then has the holidays right after? But it was it was so easy because I had done all the work ahead of time on the thinking and the stories and all of that. But yeah, it still baffles me.
It's a great thing you can do if you can manage it, because you've almost got the hard work out of the way. Then you've got it all under your belt almost immediately. It's fantastic. Yeah.
So good. Let's talk about the fourth one, coping mechanisms.
So coping, because alcohol is a sedative, it often and very often does become our coping mechanism when things start to go wrong. Like bad day at work, an argument with your partner, bills you can't pay, whatever it might be, arguments with friends, we naturally reach for a glass of wine or a beer or whatever to take the edge off it, because it is a sedative. Now, if you just day one say, I'm going to stop drinking, then next time you have that argument or that problem or whatever, you're almost like it's like a sucker punch. You're just like, I'll just have and it's not there. So you've got the double thing, you've got the problem and you haven't got any way of dealing with it. Your go-to coping mechanism has gone. So the point here is to plan in advance what you will do when things go wrong. Life is immeasurably better when you stop drinking, but it is still life, and life has its ups and downs. And you need to accept that things will come along that you need to somehow cope with. And there's almost a myriad of different things you can use there. I use exercise, I run and go to the gym. I enjoy reading books, or so many things you can do, but you need to plan them out beforehand. Because like I say, what you don't want to do is just suddenly have that argument or have that bad day at work and find yourself stood there thinking, what now?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that if I was listening to this podcast 5 years ago and I heard you say going to the gym and reading books, I would have been like, "That sounds awful." However, I think that as you go through this journey, like, you realize that how much that can actually help and bring also joy and pleasure to your life and improve your mental health and all these things, and if, like me, you heard that and you're like, "Oh, that doesn't sound that fun," you can also find the thing that works for you. It might not be joyful movement is good for everybody, but maybe it's something where, I don't know, take a dance class or whatever it is, right? Find those things that work specifically for you and try new things. And if they don't feel good the first time, try them a couple more times. And then it becomes like the thing. Oh my gosh, the reading and the moving my body. I can't live without it now. I used to think that sounded like a chore or boring.
Yeah, there's another point I think to make there that's really important. Because alcohol ruins your sleep, because it puts your heart rate and blood pressure up, and as I say, when that happens, you naturally want to sit down and do nothing. It can make exercise feel really difficult. So when you're drinking regularly, the thought of going for a run or going to the gym is absolutely abhorrent. It's like, why on earth would I do that? It's a horrible thing to do. But when you stop drinking for a bit and you're sleeping properly and your heart rate and blood pressure is where it should be, you feel energetic. And actually, exactly as I feel, I enjoy exercise. And that may seem incredibly odd to some people. But actually, when you're not interfering with your body's natural mechanism by taking these external drugs regularly, the natural state of humans is not to be sedentary. It is to use your body. And you get an endorphin hit when you do so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. So good. What about you wrote ambition as
So,
number 5?
yeah, so ambitious. So when I'm talking about ambition, I'm not talking about just in the job sense. I'm talking about a natural tendency with all living creatures to want to improve things. And that tendency can be broken down into two separate parts. One is to be very critical of what we do have, and the other is to idolize what we don't have. So between those two things, that drive to keep going, to keep reaching for the next thing is always there, because you want that house and you buy it, and then a couple of years later you're looking at the next one. Or same is true of relationships, jobs. You're desperate for that perfect job and you get it, and then a couple of years later you're looking for the next one. It's all good because it's driving you to keep improving. It's driving you on in life. But you need to be aware that there is a tendency to belittle what you've got and to idolize what you don't have. So although it's good, a lot of these things work against us when we're talking about drugs. Now, when you quit drinking, moves from the I have it category into the I don't have it category. So when you're drinking, you're very critical of it, which is easy to be because you're tired, you're lethargic, you're waking up more tired than when you went to bed, you haven't got any energy. And so you quit and you feel an awful lot better. But then it moves into the I don't have it category. So you start to idolize it. You only concentrate on the good bits. So instead of looking back on your drinking and remembering the waking up in the middle of the night, not being able to get back to sleep, or waking up in the morning feeling exhausted, or never having any energy, or hangovers, or whatever it is, you concentrate on those few occasions that you really enjoyed alcohol. And that just really warps your perspective. Now, that comes in further down the line. So this is people who they've quit, they've got through the physical stage, their sleep's back to normal, things are starting to go well. And then they suddenly look at drinking, and it's particularly the case over Christmas. They suddenly get this fantasy of how perfect and lovely Christmas is when you have a drink. But again, you just need to be aware that it's how your mind naturally works. It's
Mhm.
designed to drive you forward and keep reaching for the next goal, but actually it can work against you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reminds me of just the scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset and we talk a lot about celebrating what is, but we have to train our minds to see what is good and what we are celebrating, the gifts that we get, if you will, as a result of being free from alcohol. The more that we train our minds to see that, it's working with that natural state that we have to go towards that, like, okay, on to the next thing that we have to fix or improve, or what I don't have. So it was so important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that, that's why I think gratitude is so important, right?
Yeah.
Because to actually stop, take space, create space, notice what's good right now, right here and right now, as opposed to always, like me, you always talk about the arrival fallacy, right? Like
Mhm.
the fact that when you get somewhere, everything's gonna be fine, and that's just not right. We're left always wanting more, and so staying present and incorporating gratitude, I think, is so important too.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it comes down to, again, what you were sort of a generic point about what you're talking about earlier about controlling your thinking, because left unattended, your mind does drift off in certain directions that you might not want it to go to. So it's a question of just keeping it in track. The old saying that a mind is a very good servant, but a very poor master. You just got to keep on track of that thought process.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I haven't heard that one before. I like that.
Imagine stepping into a vibrant, warm community where faith, friendship, and freedom from alcohol all come together. That's exactly what you'll experience in the But Jesus Drank Wine community.
Each week, our members gather for connection calls that feel like a breath of fresh air, a time to share, grow, and support one another.
With an encouraging leadership team, a dedicated prayer request space, and connection opportunities in every time zone, you don't have to walk this journey alone.
Plus, we bring you masterclasses with expert guests, optional book clubs and Bible studies, and so much more.
And for those ready to go even deeper, we offer a small group coaching space called The Missing Piece. With weekly recorded coaching calls, it's a supportive place for women committed to breaking free from alcohol.
We're here to hold space for sober and sober-curious women who love Jesus or are eager to reconnect with him. Wherever you are on your path, you'll feel seen, supported, and strengthened here.
As one member described, quote, "The BJDW community is unique because there's a connection between faith and freedom from alcohol that I haven't been able to find in any other online space or through my church."
Ready to join the sisterhood? Head over to butjesusdrankwine.com/community or click the link in the show notes to learn more. We can't wait to meet you.
You already touched on it, but let's talk about fading effect bias and how that plays in. And this one is a huge one. And I think for me, I've seen this with clients where they get to a particular season, like whether it is Christmas. So like they've done a good chunk of time and they're alcohol free, but it's like Christmas is popped up or summer has popped up and they haven't gone through that season or done that thing yet. And so those romantical romance, is that a word? Ideas of what alcohol, like how it's good and sparkly and pretty and all that stuff comes rushing back. And yeah, let's talk about that.
Yes, it's very similar to ambition, but actually a different psychological process. Fading effect bias is the way that we humans, and it's universal, so it's not just people who live in the West, that it's universal amongst all humans. There's a tendency to look back on past events more positively than they actually were when we experienced them. Now, it's a clear psychological process. No one really knows why we have it, but the prevailing theory is it just helps you maintain a more positive outlook on life because you look back and everything's good. Well, not everything, but obviously you focus more on the good than the bad. But exactly the same with ambition. It creates that tendency to look back on things more positively. So when you think back to your drink, I often say to people, if you think of 24 hours of an alcoholic drink, so you have it on minute zero, so you have that alcoholic drink, you get maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes of sedation, which may be beneficial to you in that particular situation. So you've got 15 minutes of, let's call it, benefit. But then after that, you've got that corresponding feeling of anxiety. And then after that, you've got a spoiled night's sleep. And the next day, you're coping with both reduced quality of sleep, increased heart rate and blood pressure, so low energy generally, and that increased anxiety. And even for a couple of drinks, it will be there. It will be very low level, but it absolutely will be there. So from that 24-hour period, you got 15 minutes of inverted commas pleasure, followed by 23 hours and 45 minutes of payback. It's just not worth it. But when we look back on our drinking, we look back on the 15 minutes, not the 23 hours, 45 minutes. And that's a perfect example of failure effect bias. You're only looking at the good, none of the bad. And as you pointed out, exactly, it comes later in the process. So it's when people have stopped, usually quite successfully, but they often hit this new season, which again ties into what we were talking about with events. You can be stopped for months, but then you come across an event you've never done before sober, and it creates a fresh challenge. And again, it's just being aware of the process and stopping yourself and thinking, hang on, I'm thinking about that aspect of it. Now let's be fair and think about the rest of it, which after all is the vast majority of our experience of drinking.
Yeah.
That's
So
so
great. Yeah. So good, so true. I also like what you just said there too, because I think sometimes I hear gals say, especially when we're talking about there's no benefit and it's not doing that job that you're drinking it for, and they come back with it does something for me. But I think if you can put that in the context of 15 minutes, it's so helpful, right? None of us said that alcohol didn't de-stress for a very minute amount of time. It does that thing. Otherwise, none of us would have gotten hooked on it or been drinkers to begin with, right? It's a very short amount of time. Yeah.
That de-stress point is really important as well, because it's a drug, so it makes you feel like you're de-stressing because it's a sedative. But don't forget, your body goes into a stress response. It's trying to counter the sedating effect, which is why your heart rate goes up. Your body releases adrenaline and cortisol, which is a stress hormone, to counteract the sedating effects of the alcohol. So although you feel more relaxed, actually your body's doing the opposite. It's going into a stress response.
Yeah.
That's what I always say is, throwing gasoline on a fire when it comes to anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think from what I've researched, that can stay in that elevated cortisol can stay in your system for 7 to 10 days, right? So you can be battling that anxiety. And then, of course, reaching for a drink to numb that out is just doing the opposite of what we're drinking it for, which is wild. When we think about how conditioned we are to use it as something to de-stress us, it is really crazy. And it's also not known, right? It's so
Yeah.
not commonly known.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the important thing. As I look after to say to people, I'm not here to tell you to stop drinking or to cut down on drinking, but I do think people need information. It's up to people to make their own decisions around alcohol, but you can't make a decision unless you have all the information.
Yeah, 100%. Since you've written your books and done all this work, do you feel like people are becoming more informed about what alcohol actually does? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge movement now. When I first stopped drinking and wrote Alcohol Explained, there wasn't much out there apart from AA. So it was very much, am I, in inverted commas, alcoholic? If yes, quit drinking. If no, just try and be a bit more sensible and cut down a bit. Whereas now the whole approach to it is completely changed, and in my mind, to completely the right way, which is looking at it and thinking, forget what I'm drinking and how much and on what occasion. Is this serving me? Am I getting more out of it than I'm putting in? So you see people drinking even modest amounts of alcohol who are quitting drinking these days. That awareness gets around, because I think when you're aware of it and you understand it, you start to see how little benefit there is to it compared to how much payback there is.
Yeah.
The problem is I was never stopping to think about it. Because that's that sedative cycle too, that it keeps you not paying attention to all of those clues that maybe it's really not helping you like you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all busy people, and most people don't stop and really try and deeply analyze every experience in their life. They just don't have the time to. And the user experience of alcohol is I have a drink and I feel better. And that's it. We base everything on that. But when you start to peel it back, you find there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. And we spend so much of our time though, like thinking and putting in research to empower ourselves about other things. Like I remember,
Yeah.
would I be drinking almond milk or soy
Yeah.
milk or oat milk or skim milk? Or now it's like full fat milk is back in the action, right? Like how many articles did I read about that stuff? How many like times did I research a certain diet or a certain like exercise routine? But never in a million years would I have sat down and researched what that like bottle of wine every night was doing to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about other drinkers.
So this is one of the things that can pull you back almost at any time, but it's seeing other people drinking. And it can hit you at virtually any time, but it's seeing other people. And it's almost like going back to what I was saying about fading effect bias. When we see other drinkers, we see that short period of enjoyment. We don't see them waking up in the middle of the night, unable to get back to sleep, or getting out of bed feeling tired and exhausted, or dragging themselves through the next day. We just see that one bit. So it feeds into ambition, it feeds into fading effect bias. But it's just, again, this is about a perspective change. You need to look at these people and yes, they're laughing and happy. Are they laughing and happy because they're drinking or because they're out with their friends? And if it's because they're drinking, they needn't be there. They could just sit at home on their own with their drink. Okay, the enjoyment there is being with friends or being at a sporting event or whatever it is they're enjoying in the first place. And it's to start to recognize that it's like an iceberg. You're seeing the tip of the iceberg, the inverted commas pleasurable bit, and you don't see that massive bit that's under the water, which is actually the payback, the anxiety, the tiredness, the lethargy, the insomnia, and all the rest of it. So again, it's a perspective thing. And I'm not asking people to calm themselves, but just to see the reality of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's especially when we're living in a day and age where we're seeing other drinkers splattered across our social media feeds.
Yeah.
And as someone who was like the biggest culprit and proponent of like pretty pictures holding a glass of champagne, because that is what I did when I first moved to London. I wrote a blog for American expat women and I was like reviewing bars and hotels. And I was a professional at making that look pretty. And that's what it is, though. Nobody saw the hangovers. Nobody saw the fights with my husband. No one saw me snapping at the kids. Nobody saw me ditching story time with them in order to have a glass of wine at the end of the day because I needed to numb out the withdrawal from the night before, all of the stuff that we're talking about. And so the other drinkers thing is huge. And it's like doubly hard if you're engaging in any sort of like Instagram use as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's the other thing to be aware of. When people drink, they are aware that there's a downside to it, but they also feel like they need to keep doing it because they need it to enjoy social situations, vacations, Christmas, all the stuff we've been talking about. So it's in their interest to put a positive spin on it. So that's what they promote. And that's why you see pictures of Instagram, people smiling and happy in a nice bar somewhere with their drink. They never post pictures of themselves at 3 a.m, lying there riddled with anxiety and unable to get back to sleep. So again, you just need to be aware. It is subconscious, but there's this propensity among drinkers to push the good image of it to justify what they're doing.
Yeah, that's so true because then if they can justify what they're doing, they can keep doing it because well, the underlying belief is that not doing it is you're going to be missing out, full of FOMO, and your life is going to be horrible, which is totally untrue.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so good. Okay, the last one, number 8, a newfound confidence.
Right. So this I think is a really important one. People can very easily miss it. But when you quit drinking, when your brain chemistry gets back to normal, and you start to, that will make you feel just more resilient and more able to cope with more and more situations. And when your sleep improves and you're racking up not just days, but weeks and months of really good quality sleep, you start to feel better and better. Heart rate and blood pressure drops as well, which I've talked about. And that, along with that proper sleep and that brain chemistry, for most people makes them want to start moving and do a bit of exercise, and that makes them feel even better. So you start to feel really good, really confident, and everyone's different. So one person's confident and resilient is not going to be the next person's, but you really become the best version of yourself. In that state, you cannot imagine being forced to drink or whatever it is. So you lose sight of how difficult it is to quit when you're in the middle of it. So you can, and at the same time as that going on, you've got fading effect bias and ambition, and you've got other drinkers all promoting this great image. And you can very easily fall into the mindset that I can have one or two because I can quit again. And of course you can. In your current state, you could very easily quit because you're very strong and resilient and you could easily quit. But as soon as you start drinking again, that brain chemistry goes out the window. You're not sleeping properly, the heart rate, and suddenly you just can't be bothered. You haven't got that enthusiasm or resilience. So it becomes very hard to get out of that cycle. But that's the thing you need to guard against. And this is almost like the final hurdle. When you're feeling really good, you need to bear in mind that if you stop drink or if you start drinking again, you're not going to feel really good and you're not going to be able to quit. So you can't let yourself fall into that mistake of thinking, I can easily quit again. In your current state, you could, but the whole nature of drinking is you won't be in that state anymore. So you'll find it incredibly hard to stop. So your question you're asking yourself is not, can I have one or two and then I can quit again if I need to, but do I want to go back to drinking full time as I was before? Because that's where it invariably ends.
No, thank you.
No.
Yeah.
Not it.
Not yeah. I love this conversation so much because I'm thinking about the gals who have been working at this for a couple of years and they keep going back to touch the fire because they think that they can moderate. And I think that you just like beautifully put to words like why that doesn't work.
Right.
And along with singing the praises of an alcohol-free life, right? It is so much better on this side and continually going back, right? Whether it's because of fading effect bias or it's because you see a friend and she's making it look really pretty, like it's just it doesn't put us in the proper brain chemistry or the proper place and to be able to then climb ourselves back out. It's just such a it's as you said a vicious or you didn't say vicious, but whatever you said about the drug. Sneaky drug. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's so true. It's just worth bearing in mind because when you're in that situation, you're looking at it and you've got fading effect bias and ambition and all of that. And so you're looking at only the good part, not all the rest of it. So in your mind, you're thinking, I go back to drinking and drinking will be all fun and great. But when you go back to it, you don't go back to the fading effect bias warped fantasy. You go back to the reality.
Yeah.
That's the problem. That's why some people are constantly swinging between one and another because they stop, but then their memory of alcohol and drinking becomes completely warped and they see it as all fun and games. If it was all fun and games, no one would quit in the first place. I'd still be drinking.
I was just going to say that. Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's what you need to bear in mind. And that's really the most heartbreaking thing because they don't even, it's like walking into a mousetrap, but the cheese isn't even there. So you don't even get the cheese because it never was there. It's just a fantasy. You're going back to the reality and not the fantasy. And it's not a nice place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that space, instead of saying, I could just drink now and then I could quit again, maybe we say, but like, why would I want to? What's that perceived benefit what would be the point? What would be the point?
Yeah.
I think that it's also worth bearing in mind that you can almost draw a graph. So when you're drinking very heavily, you've got a lot of the downsides, and the less you drink, the less downsides there are. So the less you're drinking, the better generally you will feel. But it's not a straight line because when you quit entirely, it ramps up massively because you've got sleep, all of those things. Even one or two drinks here and there, it's going to knock your brain chemistry out. And that's going to cause you a couple of days not good quality sleep, and it's going to raise your heart rate and blood pressure. You don't get it not equal. So 10 drinks might give you 10 points of misery. 5 drinks might give you 5 points of misery. 1 might give you 1 point of misery. But when you quit, you suddenly accrue like 40 points of feeling good.
Yeah.
It's a bell curve. It curves massively at the end in terms of benefits.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a good visual. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so let's end with a tiny Tina. Is there a tiny new action that you would encourage our listeners? There's so many nuggets, so many great words of wisdom here, but is there one small step that you would say to our listeners to take?
I would say you could probably summarize a lot of this by just saying, stick with reality. And what we were talking about, your thoughts leading you off into strange and unpleasant places that can lead all sorts of places you don't want to be. Keep on top of them. And like I say, if you find yourself thinking, oh, a drink in this occasion would be nice, like I say, think of the iceberg. Think of what's underneath, and you're looking at this, that tiny bit, and just maintain that reality.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. Everybody, if you haven't read Alcohol Explained and Alcohol Explained 2,
Shame on you. Go get them.
go get them, listen to them, read them, underline them, listen to them and then read them, which is what I did. William, can you tell the ladies where they can find you as well?
The easiest place is the website, which is alcoholexplained.com, and that's got links to Instagram, the Facebook group. And in fact, the first 5 chapters of the first book are on there. So if you are interested and you haven't read it, you can go and read that before you decide whether you want to buy it or not. But that's a good place to start.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming back. We appreciate you so much.
Lovely to see you both. Take care.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrankwine.com, and be sure to follow us over on Instagram, Love Life Sober, and I'm Not Sober, I'm Free.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites, meethollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our pod so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next Monday.